It's been a long, long wait, but after a building's been in storage, say, for 40 years, and to come back, it's amazing, amazing.
Is it what you dreamed of?
In 1860, Brenham was the largest town in Texas. Nobody can even think what Brenham was the largest town in Texas. Well, Houston was 9,000, Austin was 4,000, and Brenham was 15,000. Brenham built a railroad to get to the Gulf. So Brenham was an outlet for produce, and that gave an entrance for Jews that came to America. There was no place for them to live, and they suggested if you're really Orthodox and you came from an area in Eastern Europe that you maintain an Orthodox religion. There was a little town in Texas called Brenham, Texas. It's Little Jerusalem, they used to call it. Most of them were Orthodox, but they weren't as Orthodox as the Jews that came to Brenham, but because this one here had a shul, and they had a full-time rabbi. They had a shechet. The cheder for Brenham community at that time was in the shul, the B'nai Abraham synagogue. Built in 1883, there was a fire in 1893, and it was repaired, and the building, the original building that is seen today was that building after the repairs. I was bar mitzvahed in B'nai Abraham shul when I was 13 years old in 1941. It was before the war started, and I learned my Haftorah, and I made my speech, and I read from the Torah, and I don't remember the party, nothing like the parties they have, I'm sure. It was a party. The synagogue was patterned after early Jewish synagogues in Eastern Europe. The building is unique. It looked like a country church in this area because there was a lot of churches, and they were built simply, small, economically constructed, but there was a love and a respect for religion that you don't find anymore. I'll tell you a story real quickly. A woman that came on a tour, must have been in the 1980s, and there was a busload of individuals from Goldberg Towers. There were refugees from Russia that came on this tour, and I spoke to them like I usually spoke to different groups that came on tours between the 60s and in the 1960s, 1990s. That I told them about the history of the community and the Jewish life here, and in what they did, and how they made a living, and so forth. When I got through, this woman came to me. She must have been in the late 60s, early 70s, with tears in her eyes, and she told me that this synagogue, the B'nai Abraham synagogue, looked exactly like the synagogue she attended when she was 8 years old in Russia. She said it was just exactly. She did. I thought I could think I was back when I was a child. She said it was destroyed while she was still in Russia. The Russians destroyed all the synagogues, in particular the Orthodox. And she said, but this one here was so similar to what she was raised with.
Leon Tobin, because of his father and his grandfather in that synagogue, had a tradition of being in that synagogue, and it meant a great deal to him, and so he wanted to preserve it, and for many years he and his wife Mimi looked after the synagogue, and people would come over and to view the synagogue, and he'd open the doors and give them a tour. But there weren't any services in that synagogue for many, many years. And so he took it on himself to maintain the synagogue, to take care of it, to make sure it was protected, and whatever maintenance had to be done, he facilitated that.
There was a need of the wood on the outside needed to be something done to it. The wood was deteriorating in some ways. It became difficult to paint it, so they decided to put a siding on. They cover it with an aluminum siding. The inside needed the wallpaper needed to be repapered above the wood at the bottom, and the floor was becoming, it was the original floor, and it became very rough, and so it was decided that they would repaper the paper on it because there was very little paper, but they either repapered it or they repaired it some way. And then they put varnish on all the wood, and they put this parquet linoleum floor over the wood, and they took off part of the area that they weren't using. The mikveh wasn't being used, and the part of the little school, and it's kind of squared off the building, and it was $5,600. And the contractor gave a price, and he said, "Miss Tobin, who's going to pay me?" And my mother she said, "God will provide." I don't have the money. At that time, we didn't have the money to pay him. The families in Brenham was very difficult. There was that many were left at the time that were interested or were willing to have anything close to this. And she said, "Don't worry about it. God will provide." And she walked around, she showed him something else, and he followed her, and then he said, "Miss Tobin, I asked you, but who's going to pay me?" She said, "I told you God will provide." Finally, he said, "Miss Tobin, I know you're going to pay me, but I still want to know who's going to pay. Who's going to pay me?" She said, "I told you God will provide. If I will go to Houston, I will find some individuals who were formerly from Brenham, who had relations here, the parents were here. They'll help out. I'll raise the money. You'll get paid." He said, "All right, Miss Tobin, I know you. I'm going to get my money." And he went ahead and did the work. And she raised the money in Houston. And maybe she helped out. My father helped out, whoever a few in Brenham. But with when I heard this story, when I came back from service, she told this story, and it said, "God will provide," became my slogan for how is the shul going to be moved, who is going to pay for it. And when people ask me, "What are you going to do?" I would answer, "God will provide." And God did provide. We moved that shul because it needed to have a home and need to be used. And we wanted a place that was going to use it every day. And this is why it's in Austin today.
If you look at the synagogue behind me, there's nothing ostentatious about it. It is what I would call soul built. It's spirit built. And what I mean by that is that all of the love and the hard work that went into creating the synagogue by its founding members back in 1893, 1892, 1893, you can sense it. You can sense it in the hand-cut wood. You can sense it in the handmade nails. These were people that built this synagogue because they loved the community. And that's what I would define as the neshama, as the soul of this synagogue. It's love, it's care, it's hard work, and it's commitment.
I had been trying to find some way that the building would be taken care of by some facility, some organization, someone that you could depend on that had the finances, the will, and the dedication that know that the building would be here and not become a hardware store or a mosque or whatever. I wanted someone or some organization, like I stated, that if Mimi and I were no longer here, they would see that the synagogue was maintained. If it wasn't a synagogue, at least the building would be used for a purpose I wanted it to be used for, that I thought would be something that was respectable, that was something that there was a dignity of us, that was a synagogue would always be there.
We got a phone call in the Federation office one day, and Dana Epstein, our assistant director, got the call from Leon Tobin in Brenham. Told her he had this synagogue that he'd been taking care of for decades, and he's getting up there in years, and he wanted to know if there was any interest in Austin taking the synagogue. Dana, later that day, told me about it, and I said, "You know what? Let's go see it. We'll go to Brenham, the most important thing about the day was when we saw the synagogue, because the contrast between the outside and the inside of the synagogue was amazing. It was on the outside very simple, very plain. Some people suggested it looked like a church. We later found out that in fact this was a style of architecture in the late 19th century, both in Europe and in the United States, and many of these small towns of what synagogues looked like. When you went inside, no question you were in a synagogue. It looked just like Eastern European synagogues I had seen before, with dark wood, with the balcony, with the bima in the center. It was just breathtaking, and that's how we began.
And they went back to Austin 2 days later. I got a call from Dina, and she says, so moving is going to call you. I said, my goodness, these people are really interested. So the owner came, and he looked at the building, and I went with him, and then he climbed up into the attic from the upstairs of the balcony, and he said, you know, there's 10 feet above this roof that you see. He said, boy, this building is high. So he came down, then he did some measurements, and we sat down in the back of the shul, and he said, I'm going to tell you something. This is not going to be the most easy job. I sat there for 15, 20 minutes, and I talked to Mimi, and Mimi said, you want to move it, don't you? And I said, I sure would like to move this building, because it would be used, because I understand Austin's really got a lot of growth. And she said, let's move it if you want to. I said, really? She said, yeah, let's do it. So I said, well, let's see what we can do.
They asked me if this is something I was interested in, and due to the fact that it was extremely unique, I definitely wanted to get involved on this project. You know, it goes on several layers. Basically, you're cutting a building in third that's sitting in Brenham, Texas, and you're moving it to a location in Austin, Texas. And just the logistics of being 31 foot wide by 50 feet long just makes transport an extremely difficult task.
All the interior before they moved, all the light fixtures, the urn Kaddish and the bima were taken apart by a fellow from Israel, who was a wonderful, wonderful type of craftsman that saved every nail, because every nail today has a round head. The synagogue was built with rectangular heads, and so he saved the nails to put them back in the same nail holes that the building will not be hurt.
I do what they call shiputzim and tikkunim in Israel. It's renovations and repairs. I think the day before I was to leave, Rick calls me up and said, would you be willing to stay a few extra days and go up there and take it apart for us? Because it's all built in place. It's not these aren't portable structures. And it has to be taken apart, and the things have to be taken down correctly before they start cutting this building in half. So I said, yeah, I would. So my wife flew home. I stayed for 3 days and drove up to Brenham. And I would go every morning to the shul. I would dive in there by myself, and then I would start to take it apart, piece by piece. And all the old wood is what they call long-leaf yellow pine, which is very, very old, and it's very valuable wood.
The roof had to be cut in half. It was too tall to move it, just taking the roof off the building. So they took off one area, the top part, and then they lifted it with a crane. It weighed 17,000 pounds. And they moved it and put it right on a truck in the parking lot. Then the weather, it was raining. We hadn't had rain in 2 or 3 years, 4 years. But in January of 2015, it got cold, and then we had wind, and we had rain. And every time they tried to lift the roof off of the synagogue, the weather was bad. It was so cold, and people were saying, that synagogue does not want to leave Brenham.
I have a lot of family that this means a lot to, but there is a spiritual sense when you walk in. Just to think that you're in a facility that was built 138 years ago with primitive means and methods, and for it to be so structurally sound and durable and resilient, it is quite awesome.
It was almost like a museum, because they had many different little stenders, little desks that open up. But I'd open them up, I'd find old tefillin in there. We found old portraits, we found old plaques, we found A few days ago, we found an old shofar in one of the drawers out there. I don't know how old it was. I asked Leon about it. He said, I didn't even know anything about it. And it's just almost like a museum. When I took the Aron Kodesh, the bottom part was all full of old stuff. I pulled it out. I think I found the old original parochet, the curtain in there. It's way, way below. And all the American flags that we found in here are 48 stars. You know, it's like a living museum.
I was happy to see they completed this movement because it was really, it became very depressing to see what the building was going through with this weather without a roof on it. And they did the best they could. The contractor tried to protect it, but the wind was strong and kept blowing the tarps off, and the rain would come in sheets, and it was cold, and it was just a difficult time to see this building go through the wear and tear it was getting.
This is the end of an era, and this whole shul of the rural Texas Jewish heritage has almost disappeared. And this is an opportunity to be a part of preserving that and almost resurrecting this building to be used again. It'll be here forever. As long as the Dell campus is here, this building will be here. And so it's been really profound for me. It's a real opportunity to be involved with a slice of Texas history, which I love.
You know, certainly for this is a synagogue that Leon was fourth generation, or at least third generation. And for the last half century, when it wasn't used very often, it was used by Leon. He would go there, he would sit, he would know where everybody else sat. It was a place where it's very spiritual and where he could pray and he could be part of his family. So I think there were mixed feelings, but I think Leon, understood more. Leon and his wife Mimi understood that the future in the Jewish world, in Jewish life, was more important in a sense than the past. That it was more important to preserve this as a living synagogue and as a place of Jewish worship and Jewish learning and Jewish life cycle ceremonies. That in the end, he realized that this was the right thing to do, and Leon has been an incredible partner every step of the way. Leon and Mimi in this enormous undertaking.
To tell you the truth, I have confidence in the populations of the future to show the respect and the gratitude to the people who kept Judaism alive when they came to this country and did the things that they were raised with, and they kept the traditions and the rituals that Judaism was all about.
You have a gentleman named Leon Tubin who basically donated this structure. He's helping fund the project. And for me personally, to work with someone that is that dedicated and giving, and solely it's a complete selfless act where his only objective is making sure that he preserves this for future generations, creates quite a legacy for an outstanding man.
I personally believe that Judaism goes through spikes and depressions, but there's always a flicker of a fire that keeps it alive. And the Orthodox religion is the one that keeps that spark going.
My congregation, Congregation Tiferet Israel, is a new congregation in Austin, Texas. And I really believe that having this as our makom kavua, as our fixed space, as our permanent space, will help us grow with the community. It will help us deepen our relationships with each other and with all of the congregations that are on this beautiful campus here. And I'm really looking forward to enhancing and enriching our presence here as a modern Orthodox community in Austin.
This congregation in Brenham continues because there was a spark in me from the Orthodox beginning that I lived with in my family, my grandparents, that I saw and I felt, and I still know that I wanted this building to go on. And that's why I feel that this building will always be something special in Austin, because it came with love. It's going to be there with love, and it's going to keep the Jewish faith as long as it's standing.